Let's talk about the business life cycle. On this graph, across the horizontal axis, I've got time in years, and on the vertical axis, dollars, which will represent various financial metrics. Each company begins with a launch, and then grows the business during its rapidly expanding phase. There may be a shakeout amongst competition, and from there it reaches maturity, and finally a state of decline. This is the classic business life cycle. Now, at various stages of this life cycle, financial metrics look very different. The first one we're going to review is sales or revenue. At launch, of course, it's zero. It grows very rapidly during the growth phase. Shakeout is when competition enters, and there's, as you can see, sort of a peak to the sales growth as competition becomes fierce and the industry becomes mature and eventually declines. Now, following sales or revenue, you have profit. Profit can often be negative in the early days of a business, shortly following launch, as you see it dipping negative in this graph, sort of breaking even at the growth phase, and then just slowly growing and perhaps even declining during maturity. Now, it's important to notice that this profit cycle lags the sales cycle. So there's a time delay between the sales growth and the profit growth. This is important for when we talk about funding. And the third part of the cycle is cash flow, the actual cash of the business. And cash even lags profit. So when you think about all of the upfront costs of starting a business, many of them may be capitalized and not reflected in profit, but certainly impact cash flow. So you can see cash dipping even more negative than profit in the early phases, but then rising to be higher than profit in the later phases when capital spending is largely behind the business, and therefore cash generation is higher than profit on the income statement. This is also important when we talk about funding a business. I should note that many businesses do experience a life cycle extension by reinventing themselves, reinvesting in technology, and may continue to repeat this cycle over and over. Now, let's move on to the funding life cycle. In the funding life cycle, we have the same stages of a company along the horizontal axis. Across the vertical axis, we have the level of risk in the business, the level of risk from either lending money to the business or from providing capital to the business. So, as a refresher, we have the sales cycle. But inverse to the sales cycle is the business risk cycle. So at launch, when sales are lowest, risk of the business is highest. Then over time, as sales are proven out and the business grows, the level of risk declines. This is fairly intuitive. But inverse to the risk business is the funding cycle. So at launch, it's basically impossible to get debt financing for an unproven business with no track record. And over time, that ability to get debt funding increases, with the most mature, stable businesses having the highest access to debt capital, and the early stage, newly launched businesses having the lowest access to debt capital.